Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Earth Day Live webinar, Beauty in the Eye of the Beholder, Fashion and Sustainability, Part 2, The Designers. I'm Shelley Rogers with Earth Day's Fashion for the Earth campaign, and we are so pleased today to be collaborating with our partner, Kerry Bannigan, on these webinars. Kerry is the Executive Director of the Fashion Impact Fund and the co-founder of the Conscious Fashion and Lifestyle Network. Just a few words before we begin. Very few people know about the fashion industry's negative impact on the environment. And by that, we are talking principally about the fast fashion sector of the industry. But just a few facts to put things in perspective. Today, the fashion industry manufactures 100 billion garments every single year, and 87% of those will end up in a landfill or an incinerator. Of all the ocean's microplastics, 35% are from our synthetic clothing. Every time we wash a garment that has synthetics in it, they wash into the sea. The industry is responsible for 20% of all industrial wastewater that fouls freshwater systems. In the case of fashion, we're talking about toxic chemicals, caustic dyes, carcinogens, and heavy metals. The industry is responsible for 8% of all carbon emissions in the atmosphere. Conventional cotton farming, with its heavy pesticide use and deforestation, the raising of millions of trees for animal farming, for their products that we use in our clothing and in our shoes, eventually result in the severely degraded soil, contaminated water systems, and great biodiversity loss. In developing countries in the global south, garment workers toil in very harsh conditions with little representation, if any, for often barely their country's minimum wage. The garment workers are 85% of them are women, and child labor is rampant. And this is why our fast fashion clothing is so incredibly cheap. And while this seems to paint a very dark picture, there is hope, because there are many brilliantly shining stars in the firmament that are lighting the way forward toward a very different world. And today, we are truly honored to have with us 4 of these stars. And I would say you really have to say that they are superstars, because these amazing designer brands are manufacturing clothing that are durable, well-made, sustainable, chic, beautiful, but mostly sustainable. They do no harm to the planet. And they are the hope for the future of the fashion industry. And by extension, you might say, hope for our planet. Younger designers, up-and-coming designers will look to them, learn from them, emulate them, and follow in their footsteps. On a related note, I would just like to add that earthday.org was very proud to be one of the original 9-member coalition behind backing the Fashion Act. This was put together, brought about by Maxime Bédot and the New Standard Institute, and introduced into the New York State House of Representatives and the New York State Senate this year. This is the first major piece of legislation that squares off with the fashion industry as a whole and calls it into account for its social and environmental harms through government regulation. We hope that the Fashion Act will pass. And now, without further ado, thank you, Kerry, for being our moderator today, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Welcome to everyone that's joined us today. I'm thrilled to be joined by Anyango Mpinga, designer and founder, Free as a Human Foundation, Jordan Nodazi, founder and chief executive of Boyish Jeans, Dana Davis, vice president of sustainability, product and business strategy at Mara Hoffman, and Shona Quinn, director of social consciousness at Eileen Fisher. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to dive straight into this conversation. And Dana, I'm going to kick off with you if you don't mind. So after 15 years in business, the brand remarkably transitioned from a successful fashion company to how we see Mara Hoffman today as a successful, sustainable fashion company. You were a major force behind this. Tell us about how this happened.
Well, first, I just want to thank Earth Day and Conscious Fashion and Lifestyle Network, and of course, to all these amazing panelists who are joining me today. So let's see, 7 years ago is kind of what we like to define as this aha moment, truly a breaking point. Our shifts towards sustainability came from this place of necessity. Mara had this overwhelming sense and feeling of we could no longer operate the way we were. I mean, I'll never forget, she came, sat down next to me on my couch. I was on maternity leave at the time, and just started crying, like tears streaming down her eye, and telling me, we either have to shut down this business or we have to change. And I looked at her and I knew that things were, I knew I had my work cut out for me, first off, but I knew that here I was given this opportunity where Mara herself really truly understood that we were in a place where we could change. And first steps for us through this were the learning phase, really trying to understand what were our options, trying to define what sustainability meant for the brand, who were the people who were in this space doing the work, and how could we lean into them, and understand their successes and challenges, and then really kind of putting together a strategy. In that first year was really mostly about really like honing in on our biggest impacts. So what we started with was looking at our materials. What could we change within the materials that we were using? And what did we want to totally move away from as a brand? The next phase for us was really diving into the supply chain. So we wanted to also communicate with our supply chain around these changes that we as a brand were making, and we wanted them to have the opportunity to come on this journey with us. So mapping of the supply chain was a big part. So, and I'm not just talking about the tier one, so not the people who are just cutting and sewing, but really trying to get a full understanding and grasp through our entire supply chain. And we're also looking at internal education. So how we were educating within the brand, so those who worked for the brand, and how they could also be part of this movement, and then also looking at our customer. And to be honest with you, it really took a while for us, almost maybe 2 years, a year and a half, to really communicate to our customer about what we were doing, and for them to also understand their own responsibility within this. We knew that we needed to inform them so that they could make these personal shifts within their own lifestyle. And we realized that this is a never-ending journey. We wouldn't be where we are today without those who have been leading the path and were so open and transparent with us, which in this industry, many times, I mean, we were just speaking backstage, many times that's not the case. And this is, it's a very welcoming community. We also know that we are not perfect. We don't always do it right, but we are always committed to unearthing, learning, changing. We are supportive of the greater movement of sustainability, to continue to collaborate in this collective effort, to hold ourselves accountable and others accountable. We want to be vocal in the effects to change. I also want to mention, we did this 15 years into our business, and it wasn't overnight. And I just want to say, any brands that are out there, that you can make these changes. It's just about starting somewhere.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And you touch on things that as a wider group, we're going to discuss as well, the importance of the education. We're going to explore a little bit later about the fabrics and also the supply chain. But thank you so much for sharing what you have. Now, Anyango, I'm just going to jump over to you. Now, altogether, your work is deeply humanistic and spiritual and oneness. So it's not surprising that your work also is about nature and that the environment is situated at the center of your design and your processes. Is sustainability something you just started with the virtue of your background and your instilled beliefs?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. Well, culturally, I would like to say that we have an advantage in Africa, being born and raised there. Culturally, we're very spiritual people. We feel very connected to nature and the earth. So that's something that came naturally to me. And when it came to creating a sustainable brand, I was designing from a perspective of not even having options for sourcing materials. So a lot of the times, I was upcycling, I was buying secondhand clothes and designing from that, like cutting them up and basically making new pieces from that. Um, and when it came to even finding people to work with, culturally, again, we have, when I was growing up, I remember that it was a special thing for you to go to a tailor and have a dress made, you know? And so you had your Sunday best. This is something that everybody celebrated. So the fashion industry actually grew from that. And that's what I was tapping into when I was designing. So connecting all these elements and really tapping into spirituality and how we relate to each other. There's a sense of community that comes from designing when you have your environment in mind and when you have the people around you in mind. So these are the things that really inspired me, so that when I was starting out, it was automatic that it was going to be a sustainable brand. Like there was no option for me. I was always going to be considerate of my environmental impact, and I was always going to be considerate of my immediate community, because we do have very communal living, even though like things have changed now, and Nairobi, where I was born, is a very urban city. There's still that sense of people being connected to each other that has always stayed with me and influenced how I design.
Thank you. And I can't wait to find out more. I've been a big fan of your work for some time, and it's very exciting to hear your perspective as well as we move through this discussion. Now, Shona, we're going to now delve into your journey. You had began your college work at the Fashion Institute of Technology, as many in the space refer to as FIT. And then you went on to get a master's degree from the Yale School of Environment. Your journey then took you back to return to FIT, where you taught for a few years. So can you talk to us about how do you see fashion and nature going together? And when did you realize that it was fashion that was your calling?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Carrie. Great to be here. From a very early age, I just love the creative expression that you can do through clothing. And I used to play a lot and dress up a lot, and that stuck with me. So that passion took me to FIT. And once I graduated and started working, I was given the opportunity to travel quite extensively. And so at that point, I got to see a different side of the industry, the side of, what design decisions can have as far as impact on both social and environmental issues. So I decided to go back to school, and there was this new program called industrial ecology. And that was kind of like, that sounds interesting. What's that? When most businesses think about sustainability, they think of it in terms of like the intersections and like the relationship of people, planet, and profit, or the connection between the environment and industry, more like a Venn diagram. But one of the basic ideas of industrial ecology is really that those economic and industrial systems are embedded in the broader planetary system. And so it's more like those concentric circles with the planet holding everything. And so, as opposed to the side by side Venn circles. So I think that idea, the reminder that we're on a finite planet and that there are limits to growth, and that we need to think about growth in new ways is important. And so I think that influenced me on how Eileen Fisher could have a more holistic approach to the product and design.
Thank you very much. Now, Jordan, I saw that you just had some special guests with you, and I hope they'll keep making appearances. There's one. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Now, you began your journey to Boyish Jeans from having previously worked with other brands, including Reformation, where you began. You actually started their sustainable denim wear. And I'm sure you got to see a lot firsthand, from factories to how things were made. Can you tell us what you found working firsthand in the factories and how you've used that knowledge and experience to create a radically different blue jean?
Definitely. So I was very fortunate that, living in Los Angeles and having the industrial business of fashion and denim specifically here, I was able to just go see things firsthand. And so from the beginning of my career, I was spending a lot of time at the factories and learning, not from corporate standards, but learning from the factory owners, from the factory workers, and really building relationships. I would actually even learn a lot of the techniques that they would do, so I can learn how to adjust them and really dive into the ingredients of what makes a jean. The more I kind of expanded into my career, I started realizing all the heavy amount of chemicals, and even with the fabric processing, that I can probably adjust that to get a more unique and more natural look. At that point in time, I didn't think it was sustainable. I was just like, I wanted it to look better. And so when I ended up at Reformation, I thought the one most unique atmosphere of the company that attracted me to it was obviously this company that looked sexy and unique, yet it was sustainable. Because I think at this point in time, most people are thinking, oh, sustainability, has to be like going on a hike or mountain climbing and, outdoorsy. And it wasn't that. And so, I felt this challenge to, what is sustainability with denim? At that point in time, the only thing I'd ever heard about when it came to a better made product for the environment was organic cotton. However, at that point in time, Reformation had a very strong stance against organic cotton due to the water usages from most organic cotton growers around the world. So one of the things that was great was this unique scientific reports called life cycle assessments. And so as I started diving in to figure out really what does sustainability mean to denim, that I actually reached out to some other companies like Shona at Eileen Fisher. She actually gave me some great details. I thought that it was really weird that we had a company that was, another clothing company that was giving me resources. And then I realized how tight the community is for sustainability, and that this is an industry, and specifically with sustainability, to share information, not to challenge each other with trying to make more money or copy each other. It was like, who can do better, who can share that information. It was more of a teamwork atmosphere, which I love, because that's where real results happen. And not only that, like the challenging part too keeps it evolving. And so at Reformation, I was really able to define what that can be. And as I started Boyish, I wanted to see where I can take it even further and share even more information, because I know at Reformation, they didn't necessarily share a lot of the technical know-how on how to create sustainability, more so just about like sexy math and fun little things. That was nice because it really attracted a more mass population. So with Boyish, we got really intense. We have a very strict plastic policy. I've been on a mission to take plastics completely out of denim, to make them 100% recyclable, made of recycled materials and recyclable. So it's a full circle, kind of concept that William McDonough from Cradle to Cradle kind of created a long time ago. And I'm just applying these tactics from everyone that's already kind of told us what to do. You just kind of have to figure out how to do it in your own way. And that's where kind of Boyish came out of.
It's great. And I love two things here, really highlighting the collaboration behind the scenes that I think a lot of people don't know is happening, and what is always perceived as a very competitive sector. I'm not saying that that's not still there, but it's great to hear. And like even your shock saying you're talking to other brands in the space to share knowledge. That's fantastic. And I think it's great that you highlight a lot of solutions and strategies are there about how do brands take them and apply them and make them their own. So thank you. So Nyango, I would like to discuss how your sustainable practices changed. You were invited to be in residence for Helsinki Fashion Week in 2020, and it was all about 3D. Now, a lot has happened globally since that time, and you appeared as an avatar, and it's something that we're starting to see in a lot of places. Tell us what 3D design is all about, and how is this relevant to your design practice now? And I just want to add in, and I can repeat this later on if I have to, but just want to add in as well there, Nyango, to this question. You were already working without so much waste. Will you now go total 3D design from now on?
I would say it's a very important part of the beginning process of designing. Because up until my residency, I had no idea what 3D design was. And I was paired with a really, really good 3D artist to bring my vision into life. And one of the things that I was trying to address at that point was, when we talk about waste, when it comes to the fashion industry, we don't really consider the waste that comes before, like when you're prototyping items, when you're making multiple toiles to get your garment. So inadvertently, when it came down to creating a collection and designing in 3D, all I had to do was get my team together to do the actual patterns. And then from there, the pattern is actually used on Clo 3D to create the garment. So if you're making a size 8 garment, you have to still go through the process of making the pattern. And then the digital artist creates the garment from there into what you see on the screen, or onto what you saw on my avatar, for instance. So that process in itself eliminated a lot of waste that would go into trying to make sure the outfit looks the way you want it to look. Um, the interesting thing is, once I launched the 3D collection and did a campaign from it and dressed women virtually, I did a campaign where we had women send in basically their pictures. They were they were half naked. They're wearing their underwear, and then we dressed them virtually in those garments. Then you could actually see how the garments look on the body. And I was able to get a few clients from that before actually making the pieces and going into market. So it proved to be a very interesting process in designing, and it's something that I'll definitely continue with, because it gave me an idea of how to minimize waste, first of all, but then also using AI tech to predict how an outfit would look on someone's body was also a key element in that. So and also, of course, testing it on myself with the avatar. That was a fun experiment as well.
Would you say that this is the wave of the future and sustainability, or just one part of it?
I think it's still one part of it, because at the end of the day, you still have to make that garment, whether you like it or not. If you're making it for real people, you're still going to have to, cut and sew that garment. So it's just one aspect of it, but it does minimize a little bit of the waste that happens especially in the prototyping phase of the garment.
I see all the nodding in the boxes from your peers. So I think that's right. Thank you, Anyango. And Dana, I want to come over to you and actually just picking up something that Jordan had said earlier is about the importance of sharing as much information as can. And, looking at reports and information and communicating. And, Dana, transparency is thought to be one, or if not the most important way in which change will come about in the industry. And we have heard this buzzword for quite some time now. Now, the Mara Hoffman website is almost a primer on how a brand can be transparent about its journey through and to sustainability. Is transparency also what many customers are now looking for? And is it a good thing all round, for the brand's profitability and the planet? And tell us about this.
Yeah, I always like to think that the customers are seeking transparency. I also always try to think, how would a customer approach the information that the brand is giving? And when I think about internally how hard it is to navigate through the amount of information we're receiving, we really try to keep it as digestible as possible. But as a brand, we are huge advocates of transparency and really work very hard. I've told this story before, and I always like to tell it of, I've been traveling around a global supply chain for over 15 years. And in 2016, on my first trip back to Asia after this, transformation through the company, was a very different trip. In the past, spending some time at the mills, spending time in the factories. And I let the factories know this time, we'd already been speaking through the changes we'd been making, and was very clear on, I needed to watch, we were able to visit from the fiber supplier all the way through to the cut and sew. And got to the factory or got into the mill and they're saying, okay, this goes to the dye house. Okay, so we go to the dye house and the dye house is walking me through every single process. And the dye house says, well, and then, it gets this additional, softener, enzyme wash or something. And I said, oh, well, where is that machine? Oh, well, we send that out. And I'm like, but I thought our goal here was to see everybody through this product supply chain. And they're like, oh, yeah, but we just send that out and it comes back the next day. And that is just an example of, to gain that true transparency through that entire supply chain takes so much work. The best way is to be on the ground within your entire supply chain, but that's near impossible. So some ways that we kind of tackle that and how we try to manage it within the brand is about keeping the supply chain as small as we can. So we have really committed manufacturing partners who we've been working with for, well over a decade. And then when we get to the material side, which can be very tricky when you're a fashion brand and you're not making the same consistent product over and over, is you enter in these different fabrics. So as a brand, we're very committed to keeping that material portfolio as small as we can so that we're not adding new suppliers into that supply chain. And we work directly with our suppliers. So sometimes brands work with maybe a full package vendor and they send things out to different, or, collect fabrics from different vendors. So we really nominate those suppliers within our supply chain so that we have more control over who it is that we're working with. And then you have to ensure that a lot of that information is valid. We require data sheets on specific things, certifications. We do a lot of testing, so material testing, garment testing. We require chain of custody, transaction receipts for specific materials. So it's maintaining that transparency is really hard. And what's really exciting also to see is some of the new technology that's coming into this space. Carrie and I had mentioned in a previous conversation around these digital passports, or around just kind of the ability to track the garment. We did a pilot project with a company called Textile Genesis, where we worked with a blockchain-like technology, and we were able to work from tracing our fiber all the way through to the finished goods. And to have that type of transparency and having your suppliers helping onboard that data into the system is really empowering and amazing to see. And I do hope that that is where the future of garment manufacturing will go, so that we can ensure that what we are told is actually factual, and we can work in tandem with our suppliers.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And, even just the parts you're sharing here, there's so much work that goes into this, but it has to happen. So thank you for taking us on that. Now, Shona, Eileen Fisher is a certified B Corp company, which means living up to very high standards all the way from farm level to the finished product. And there's a myriad of aspects and issues of producing clothing. For you, it must mean wearing dozens of hats, but maintaining the B Corp status that has to be regularly renewed. Is this something that's difficult? And how do you manage that? Is it requiring a lot of work with nonprofits and trade associations and third-party certifications? Or is it that you're managing direct relationships with suppliers and factories? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Great question. And I would say pretty much yes to all of those questions. Going through the B Corp certification is quite rigorous. And we just got recertified recently, and we had to do the assessment on 2020, which was a really tough year for us due to the pandemic. But we did it, and we are recertified. And I think the resilience of the company, that alignment within the company of the work and our values had a lot to do with being able to recertified at such a hard time. And I think it goes back to that idea of, as a business person, how do we define success? In most cases, that usually means focusing on growth and profitability. For Eileen, as the founder and CEO of the company, she has always had a deep understanding of what it means to hold on to those conscious business practices. And she's made a few, Eileen and the leadership team have made a few very important decisions about the business. One, it's privately held, so we have a lot more flexibility on how we focus on different things than a publicly held corporation might. We're also 40% employee owned, so the employees are really engaged in the work, particularly when times get a little tough. And we've also changed our legal structure, so we're a benefit corporation, not just B Corp certified, but a benefit corporation, which is connected to the legal structure. So our business is about our business values creating positive impact for society and the environment, in addition to making a profit. So in that sense, there are synergies with the B Corp and that certification process. Communities, thriving communities, planetary well-being, the governance structure are all very important pillars within the B Corp, and they're important aspects to the work that we do at Eileen Fisher too. So it's not necessarily easy getting certified. I would say to anybody considering it, think about it as a journey. When we first got certified, our first year in 2015, we were barely getting to the 80 points, and we thought we were pretty good on the sustainability front, but we definitely had our work cut out for us to do that. So I would just encourage folks to see it as a journey as opposed to a final destination.
Thank you very much. And to everyone watching, we're seeing questions coming in. Thank you very much. Keep sharing them, sending them, however you're watching this across the various platforms. We'll be getting to audience questions in about 15, 20 minutes. So Jordan, you're very aware of your supply chain. How does a designer get to know its supply chain? And can you rely on third-party certifications?
Well, it's an interesting perspective. There's a lot of things going on in my head with all the discussions that we're having and the questions coming in. And I'm going to try and be the most optimistic I can, but I am very well known for being a very pessimistic person when it comes to the outlook. Yes, I'm a very, very realist. Sustainability is become a very butchered word, and even the concept of it. To me, it always comes down to more of an accountable efficiency. And, accountability is obviously one of the issues that we have with our world today because people are no longer accountable. This is just part of the human, anthropological perspective of our minds evolving. It goes back to people make decisions purely based on their own good. So at the end of the day, you have, we have a supply chain that produces profit. That's what we have. That's the fundamentals of, doesn't matter if you're making sustainability or, sustainable fashion or, fast fashion, carcinogen rich garments that your largest organ on your body is going to absorb while you wear it. Our biggest struggle is we have to adapt our sustainability, not just for profitability, but, and I've heard this said by several people in the discussion today that, it's more a passion to do it, not because of profitability, but do it because it's the right thing to do. But you also have to remember it's all about balance, because if you're not going to be profitable, you're not going to be able to be a business. And this is really the defining struggle. The last 2 years have been very difficult for fashion companies, especially the ones that are probably doing sustainable fashion. They've probably gotten hit a little bit harder. Why? Well, because there's a lot of people going out there looking at what all these sustainable brands are doing and be like, let's see what they're doing. Third-party certification, that one's easy. We could just buy that one. Great. Let's do that now. And this is actually what led us during this pandemic. I started actually, in a depressed mentality, realizing and waking up, I needed to be woken up to, I can't be perfect. I can't do everything. And that sustainability, going back to where I started, was identifying mistakes. Once again, accountability. That's really what it is. And that's what I think a lot of people have problems with is what's wrong with my supply chain? What's wrong with our company? What's wrong with, our profitability focused on, selfish reasons? And getting to that, it becomes a very philosophical perspective, a very psychological perspective, a sociological perspective. And that becomes already complicated on top of an already complicated scientific, background of producing products through a supply chain. And a lot of times these factories and suppliers maybe aren't really that aware. So a lot of this comes back down to something I mentioned earlier, which is teamwork. You have to work with your supply chain. You have to find the right players, and you can't be afraid of finding the wrong people. That's going to happen. It's like dating. Ooh, that just gives me the chills thinking about that. You're going to have, so much out there, so much bad, so much good, and you're just sifting through the chaos. Look, this is why I just have dogs. It's a lot easier. If I can just train them to pick and pack and ship all my packages, then this would be an ideal world. We wouldn't have to worry about euthanizing all these dogs that people couldn't take care of, or decided that they didn't want them anymore after the pandemic stopped. So once again, it's always about just trying to figure out your path, and not be afraid of making mistakes, because that's what sustainability is all about. Finding out what you did wrong, and guess what? And tell everybody, tell your customers. They'll appreciate it. And never be put down by all those people out there that are going to come and shame you for everything you're not doing, because that's going to happen. The more good you're going to do, the more you're going to attract people saying, well, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, you're not diverse enough. Whatever is going to come at you, you can't be afraid of it. Just take it in, and if you feel that it's something you should do, then do it, and don't be afraid to admit that you weren't doing it.
Yeah, that's a good part there. Thank you for that. Now, there's a lot we've got to cover in the remaining time that we have. So I'm going to do a quick fire question to you actually as a group together, and then I'll move back to some individual questions. I would love to just get super quick, maybe a 30-second or 1-minute answer from each of you. And it's about education. Education plays a key role in how we get citizens to buy sustainably. The average consumer is not buying sustainably, or definitely not all of the time. And for many reasons. Now, while there is a trend towards thrifting and swapping and rentals and resale, there definitely doesn't seem to be enough that would overtake the sales of this throwaway fashion society. So starting with you, Dana, what measures can be taken to educate consumers?
I mean, in any way you can educate a consumer or have a conversation with them, I think is our responsibility as a brand who's also telling people to buy something. So whether it's in your hang tags or in your communication on your website, but it's also how you as a brand approach how you design things. So like thinking about longevity of those pieces, or getting somebody to understand that maybe you don't need all of these things in your life, but narrowing down your closet into those few staples. We very much speak to wardrobe dressing. Mara herself wears basically the same thing all of the time, and it's like this idea of uniform. Also, I guess for us, we speak to our customer about this. We launched a full circle program, so peer-to-peer resale platform, right? So if you're going to invest in a piece from us, and yes, we know it's an expensive piece and investment for many. So how do you ensure that there's value to that piece when you're done with it? Creating a marketplace where the customer can come back to it, list that, and then it gives it a second life. So to keep that garment in its current state for as long as possible. But continuing to just speak to your customer is really, it's the brand's responsibility.
Great. And Jordan, I know you shared quite a bit a moment ago about just sharing. Anything you'd quickly like to add about the key role of education?
Very important. The unfortunate side is you always have to remember the opposite force that's putting that education down as far as possible is profitability is a lot more profitable when you're selling to people that are not as intelligent. So this is what our world is facing. Government regulations always going to struggle, because guess what? People with money can evolve way faster than the government can. So they can learn things before you can learn about them and then suppress them. So always remember that's what you're up against. That's why I've always been very fortunate with my career to I didn't end up in corporate companies, and didn't end up getting manipulated by that mentality. I've been in the constant struggle digging out of a hole sort of life, which is not something I necessarily recommend. I think there's a finer balance, maybe somewhere in the middle. Continue always, figure out ways to teach people. If you go on our website, people are always telling me, like, I don't know if I'm shopping or if I'm learning. Like we have a very extensive fiber guidelines The one thing when we built our fiber guidelines was proof, science. Where are we getting this information? I'm not just going to start telling you, hey, guess what? Fashion this, that, this, and that. And I realized, hey, the one thing that I can do that all these other companies can't do is I can build unique fibers that are based off of natural fibers. And I can do that better than all these other big companies because they require so much resources and so much high profit margins because they're pretty much designing products made to go on sale. No one's these big companies aren't designing stuff to sell at full price. Their margins are so low because they need to sell it at 50%. And you're like, wait a minute, the price is already like fractions of what it should be. So this is the complication. Why? How are they able to do that? And comparing that to the products that you're doing and using scientific proof.
Thank you. And Yango, what measures can be taken to educate consumers?
Well, I like to keep it simple. And I always say, like, consumers are much more intelligent than we give them credit for. I get so many questions from people, and and it could be like a current consumer, it could be a future consumer, which is mostly students who are constantly like reaching out to me for information. So I think as long as the message is part of your storytelling and it's intrinsically part of what your brand is about, it makes it much easier because then you're not making things up as you go along. Like it's actually something you're living through and it's something you're actively doing. So I think keeping it simple is just the best way to go in terms of sharing information. And don't be afraid to accept questions from people as well. Because I think a lot of brands are sort of like scared, when you're a little bit challenged or when someone, asks about maybe new technology that you haven't really thought about. So I like to keep it simple when it comes to communicating and educating the consumer. And there's also and I've also learned a lot from those consumers in the process of it because I don't know everything. I can't claim to know everything. I'm constantly learning. So I take that approach to also sharing information, that it's an opportunity to also learn.
Great. Thank you. Shona, anything to add?
Sure. Well, I would totally agree with Anyango on that idea of storytelling, I think is important and making it easy for the customer. So when she's ready to click on an item, she can click down and see the details of it, where it's from, how it was made, what are the product details. So the customer has to be interested in looking at those details. And voting with your wallet is important. I also would say, though, and that idea that Dana mentioned, investment pieces and purchasing your favorite pieces. But the what you're buying versus the why you're buying is a little more interesting too, perhaps. And why are the customers buying this? And I use myself as the example of when I want to focus my attention on an article and I'm reading, and then somehow this advertisement for shoes comes up right beside my article, and somehow I'm clicking on that shoe ad, and then I'm searching shoes, and I'm like, wait a minute, why am I looking at shoes? I was supposed to be reading an article. And so then pulling my attention back to doing that, hopefully not buying the shoes, doesn't always happen, but understanding that advertisers are also very good at connecting with us, and that the iPad and the cell phone is a new source of income for lots of companies, and they're going to find every which way to capture your attention. And so to be aware of that and focus your attention on what it is you want to do. Is it you want to buy this product, or are you actually trying to do something else right now?
Thank you very much. Now, for the essence of being respectful of all of your time, there is a lot of questions coming in from the audience. So I would like to actually, before we move over to audience questions, I want to go back to a little bit earlier what Dana and Jordan were touching on around fabric. So Dana, with Mara Hoffman, it's mostly entirely sustainable when it comes to fabrics. Tell us about this, the fabrics and the materials that you use.
Yeah, so for us as a brand, we prioritize natural fibers. And for us, it's like, how do we work with the most recycled content within that? So we do a lot. We just launched a product, 100% recycled cotton. We just launched 100% recycled cashmere wool. We work with climate neutral wool, hemp. So again, those real natural fibers. But we're also up against a really big challenge as a brand in our swimwear. So you see this word used, sustainable swimwear, but let's be honest, like that does not exist. So, and that's something that we're really aware of. And anybody who knows me knows that I'm always bringing that question to the table. When will we have alternative fibers that can replace those? And there are some that are coming, that are scaling right now. And I'm excited that we're working with some of those mills and doing R&D. But the tricky thing is, right, you also want to have the right fiber that equals performance and lasts long. And so in swimwear, that's really, really important. So again, that education piece becomes really important to that. How do you get the customer to understand that if you're going to buy a swimsuit, understand what it's made of? So for us, that is a recycled polyester, it's a recycled nylon. It's not, the end all be all sustainable fabric. But as a customer, what you can do is ensure that this will last as long as possible. And when you're done with it, come bring it back to us and let us hold on to it until we can find those solutions. And that's something that Shona and I have talked about for years. And we've worked with Eileen Fisher around what are some of those ways that we hold on to these materials for future innovation that's coming to market. But yeah, we're really committed to continuously improving. And when we think about what's really sustainable, I think about what Anyango's doing is using what already exists as well. Like how important it is to not continue to make new materials when there are already ones in existence. So again, for us as a brand, I'd mentioned that material portfolio. So we buy into fabrics that we know that we will continuously use, because when you produce fabric, there's always wastage, there's always extras. So our wastage becomes part of a new product for us. So continuously using our liability, and we work with other organizations to ensure that we're also able to tap into other brands' dead stock. So it's just about really figuring out for a brand how you can continuously do better, and then, like we said, that education piece to the customer.
Great, thank you. Jordan,
Yeah.
tell us about the sustainable fabrics Boyish Jeans uses. You have called your blue jeans rigid jeans. How do you deal with the fact of you don't use synthetics that give that stretchy quality that people liked at one point around denim?
Just take all the hate from everybody that yells at us for jeans not fitting them. No, I mean, we do make women's jeans that don't stretch. I'm going to get a lot of negative feedback from women, but the good thing is I'm a man and I've been taking that my whole life, so I can listen and I can adapt and I can change. That's the whole goal here. That's what collaboration is. That's what cohabitating is. That's what partnerships are. And so, I like that because, it challenges me. I know I can't just make jeans that don't stretch. So it's like we partnered with chemical recyclers that are learning how to separate synthetic fibers from natural fibers. And so, in the beginning, I worked a lot with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to build this sort of jeans redesign project based on a lot of what I was doing at Reformation. And then, also supported them through Boyish for a little while. But, I wanted to, once again, I always like taking things a little bit further. I'm a little bit more strict. I've been working for the last, many years, because I surf and I saw what Patagonia was doing as they're adjusting, from what I think is one and only few actual, sustainable things that they've done in a while, because they're probably, like the oil company's largest supporter because they love their plastics. But you have this Ulex material that they created, which is, instead of using, first of all, neoprene is also, if people don't know, in sustainability, with fibers that are like, there's like the bad ones and then like the not so bad ones and then the good ones. Well, it's like neoprene is like up in the worst ones. And so they're able to adapt and use a natural rubber to create a wetsuit, which is, something that is also very beat up and very used. They were able to take an oil-based to a plant-based. And yes, it's still, at the end of the day, you're still making, it's still plastic technically in that sort of regard, but it's the derivatives in which you're using a renewable source, that is promoting plants too, which also in the process of producing this material, you got carbon dioxide sequestering going on here. You got oxygen being built, not like oil is just like, let's pump more, carbon dioxide out into the world, and let's, rape the world of all the resources we can. And then after we get that out, let's just go keep doing this. It's like a cycle that keeps going, and that's where you get like all these plastics that are coming out of it, and then people are like, well, let's just take the recycled bottles that we just made out of it and then make them downcycle them into a clothing that then sheds into the ocean. So it's accountability of realizing what materials are we going to choose and where do they come from? Whereas like you have to trace them back, you have to look at the resources, and then you have to identify the best that you can do for what you're doing. Because remember, plastics are still very important. It's one of the most modern best and modern inventions of our time that has gotten us to where we are. It is important to make a snowboard jacket or ski jacket out of that. Yes, you can use plant-based plastics, but that's still very new. They're using castor beans and lipids to be able to create plant-based plastics. So going back to what Dana was talking about with swimwear, there are plastic-based polyamides that you can replace traditional polyamides or polyesters or recycled polyester with something that's plant-based, and then still has the hydrophobic properties of what you need for swimwear. There's natural rubber, which you can use, which I was talking about with Patagonia, with the Ulex. We did that and we used that with stretch. Unfortunately, there's been some obstacles around that with, certain patents and things like that to really give it out to the world. Once again, sharing information is not the same mentality with everybody. But, the way I look at it is in the future, we can have stretch jeans and have them be completely plant-based, performance still better than even before with the polyester and the plastic-based. But it takes us challenging each other. It takes people realizing, all right, I'm going to support the companies that are doing this and pay more, because to me, it's an investment, not just investing in a product that might last. It could not be that great, but if I don't invest in it and give it its chance, it's never going to reach the hundreds of years of plastic innovation that has been put into a multi-trillion-dollar oil industry. So
Thank you for sharing that perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And there are
very much.
resources too. So like,
Yeah.
to figure all this stuff out. I'm not just blurting them out. So I know there's like,
No.
So.
And so I'm going to ask a question here that I actually also had, but I see has popped up from the audience too. And then we will make our way through in the last time that we have to go through some more audience. Now, is overproduction and overconsumption at a point where government has to get involved? Now, this is a question open to all four of you, as whoever wants to answer. Do you see promise with the EU's textile strategy and with the new Fashion Act introduced into the New York State legislators? Now, with Dana and Shona, you being in New York, if either of you would like to share some insight first to that part, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's definitely a trend for more legislation, and it's a good thing. There's definitely a place for government engagement. And I think an opportunity to lean in on businesses to be more responsible for their supply chains and product. We are very much in agreement with the spirit of the Fashion Act bill, and also believe that the bill is not fully formed yet. So we're watching to see how it develops. It's tough. I'm sure the legislators and the folks involved in writing it, you get pressures on both sides. You're not doing enough, you're doing too much. And how do you find the right balance to create legislation that could actually turn into a bill for regulating?
Dana, I see you nodding.
Yeah. I mean, I echo what Shona has to say. I think accountability is key, and the brands need to be held accountable. I think we all have to know also that there's not one bill that could speak to all of the environmental and social needs that are needed. So understanding that there needs to be many bills that are passed that maybe are very focused in on specific functions that brands need to be doing. And we are here to support those, and in any way we can empower those bills, because we do believe that legislation is needed in order for change, definitely.
And Yango, anything to add?
I mean, perhaps I think about these things in a very simple way, but I might imagine a situation where brands that were overproducing were actually made to pay for overproducing, and like there was a cap on how much you can actually produce and how much you can put out into the market, and monitor like how often it's going into the market. I feel like things like this would stop these big brands from exploiting the labor force, first of all, because you can't have that amount of production without exploiting people, So it does come down to policy. You know, as a small brand, I made a conscious decision that as much as possible, I would not be overproducing. You know, if you go on my website, a lot of the items are there on pre-order. You know, I don't produce more than I require. Even when it comes to textile sourcing, I made sure I formed partnerships with textile manufacturers that weren't going to, you know, require a high minimum production for you know, a high minimum quantity for producing materials. Because when you go to suppliers, some of them will demand that you produce 300 meters, 500 meters, just for you to get one color of a fabric, you know, piece of fabric. And so I made sure that I wasn't going to work with them specifically, because I don't want to produce fabric that's going to sit in stock, and then I have to constantly like manage, you know, the waste as well that would come with that. So I think in terms of policy, there are simple steps to it, but perhaps I'm oversimplifying the situation. But I feel like if people were made to pay for their waste, then I think they would really have to assess how much they're actually putting out there into the market.
I see a big thumbs up from Jordan there. Anything to briefly add, Jordan, before I jump over to the audience questions? I
Not much is
know.
ever, not much is brief with me.
I know, that's why I said brief.
Yeah, I'll make it brief though.
No, it's great.
Yeah,
If we had all day, I would
no, I
want to
know.
hear all of this because I love it. You've all got so much insight to share.
No, I know, and I agree with everything. We'd have to remember that it's going to be a difficult transition. You know, sustainability still has to be profitable. This is how an economy runs. So it is difficult for regulation because you can't put too much stress on that. And you know, this is also how inflation happens. You know, you start just making everything expensive. That will actually inflate the economy too. You know, because it's not like, I mean, is this person getting paid more? You know, are customers getting paid more so that they can afford the extra sustainability? So there's always going to be that dynamic branch. Once again, hundreds of years of, you know, evolution with plastics we're up against, you know, and so that's why what we have to do is we do have to do, you know, maybe some sort of, you know, plastics tax. You know, you want to use plastics, that's fine. The people that want to use it for company wise get taxed. The people that are going to buy it get taxed. Why? Because guess what? You know how difficult it is to actually recycle a recycled polyester garment? Very, very difficult. The quality is crap. Excuse my language. But, you know, natural fibers can then be turned into cellulosic fibers. There's a lot of innovation there. You know, we use a fiber called Refibra from a company out of Austria, Lenzing, that produces also Tencel and Modal. You know, they're taking scraps and natural scraps and turning it into their cellulosic process. So once again, creating circularity is always the thing that we have to think about. You know, it sounds nice. Oh, a recycled bottle. I know exactly what that is. I put that in the blue bin sometimes and I'm doing good. Like, no, because a lot of things don't actually even get recycled to be put in the recycle bin. So once again, it's accountability, because people, they don't want to know all the bad things that are happening in the world. The famous saying, what you don't see don't hurt you. That's pretty much
it
the
applies
golden
strongly
rule.
to fashion.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
exactly.
Now we're going to run over for a few minutes, but if the four of you are okay with that, I'm going to just pick a few of these questions and assign to you. So Dana, we have got a question in here from someone watching via Twitter. I'm so glad that this is all being talked about more. The fashion industry can do better. Ask a consumer, as a consumer, what can I do to make sure that the fashion I'm purchasing is sustainable?
Well, first and foremost, think about the purchase, the process of purchasing. Why are you making the purchase? You know, Mara and I always talk about that emotional connection. People are purchasing something maybe because they had a bad day, or why is it? And is it something that you truly need? And then I'll go back to that idea around this, you know, buying those pieces that will last for a really long time. So ultimately, we need a lot less stuff. So investing in something that you can take care of. We speak to wearing more and washing less, right? So when you actually think about keeping your garment, the quality of it for as long as possible. But if you do need to go out and purchase something, there are so many options that exist. I mean, here we have 3 great brands that are being represented, but I also say to look at these peer-to-peer resale platforms that are existing, or you know, just making smart purchases, and then asking the brands, putting that onus on the brands, asking them the questions. I think it was Anyago who mentioned people asking about specific things that they're doing. the more customers reach out to me specifically with questions, the more empowered we feel as a brand to continue to make these changes. So, go to the brands and ask them what it is that they're doing, and for them to be transparent with you as the customer.
Thank you. Showing up, next question in. What are the biggest impediments to making the changes you've been suggesting? I mean, I know you've been working on a huge journey of many changes and things have to adapt. Is there any of the obstacles and impediments you could share with us?
Yeah, I guess, we really focused with engaging our design team in the work, because they really kind of, just for the same reason you're hosting this group, design, the initial idea, how do you incorporate social, environmental ideas into the fabric, literally. When you're choosing a fabric, when you're choosing recycled over conventional, or regenerative organic over conventional, there's so much behind that idea. So, and the designers really hold a lot of power in making those decisions. So I think it's a good place to start. And then I think it's a bit of, if you've got your finance team and they're very, they come from an MBA financial background, how do you get them to kind of open up to the idea that there are other values to be considering, and that actually those values can support the brand value, and how customers see you as a company, as an organization, and be able to show how do you measure that? What does it look like as the financial team wants to engage in this work? I'll stop there.
No, that's a lot and great. Thank you. Now, this last question, I would love to hear perspective from Anyango and Jordan. And it's actually asking about, what about the psychology of fashion? How do you create a story that counters the status quo to get people to buy your clothes?
For me, it's always staying true to who I am as a designer. And, if I'm influenced by my traditional background, architecture, I say that. If it's a spirituality, I say that. I have no shame in being myself in the design process. And I think it's worked to my advantage, because every time I've encountered customers, who know my work, if we're in an environment where they're introducing me to someone else, they'll tell my story on my behalf. I've been in situations where I didn't even have to say anything, and had a customer introduce me to someone else who was a potential customer, and say how they were, they loved the collection, and how I tapped into like my traditional background, whether it's architecture, like the print I'm wearing right now. So that authenticity for me, I feel like has worked in my favor. And I feel like people connect to that, because we're in an age where there's a lot of information out there, and people want to feel included in your story. They want to feel like they have that personal connection with you. And if I can give them that, then I can easily convert them into customers.
Thank you for sharing that. Jordan?
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit about this previously, but to me, I always kind of separate the two customers. The world that we live in, like we just went through a president who pretty much told you not to believe science. But that's, it's not just him. It's the way that we are being adapted into social media is kind of destroying our respect for specific information. So on one end, you have people taking shortcuts, the heuristics of the psychology and the sociological perspective of everybody. And then you have like the people that want to dig deep. So, I always say, always think about these two. You're marketing to both of them. People want to dive deeper. They're probably smart enough to go dive without you really having to shove it in their face. So it's always like deliver a little bit of information that people might not fully grasp, but sparks curiosity. Because curiosity is what you want to bring them in, and then show them the full picture, but don't come at them too much. It's like people trying to talk to me for the first time. They're just like, whoa, please get away from me and never talk to me again.
Oh, Jordan, I love that's the great way to wrap it up. Thank you, all four of you, so much. All the various perspectives dialing in from all over the world. And I really appreciate what you've been able to share about your journey. I'd love to hand over to Shelley of Earth Day. Thank you all again for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy birthday to our wonderful panelists. Thank you, Onyango, Dana, Shona, and Jordan for being here today. It was a great discussion. Thank you, Carrie, for being our moderator. Thank you to David Mecker in Washington, D.C. for his technical assistance, and Megan McGastocker of the Fashion Impact Fund for her help. I want to say one last thing. EarthDay.org has a great project going on now. If you go on earthday.org, Fashion for the Planet, you'll see our project called My Planet, My Closet. We want people to send us in a short video. It can be 1 to 2 minutes. Show off a few of your sustainable pieces of clothing. It can be just one piece of clothing, and we will put these videos up on our social media platforms. Help us to further the cause of sustainable fashion and help educate people about what that is. That's would be a terrific thing. And thank you all again. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you, everyone, for being here today.